The Avengers have become the crown jewel of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, bringing together some of the most iconic superheroes in film history. But what if I told you that the original plans for the Avengers were vastly different from what we saw on the big screen? That's right. Marvel Studios had a very different vision in mind before the Avengers assembled in 2012. And today, we're breaking down everything that almost happened. The original lineup that could have changed the course of the MCU, and how these plans ultimately evolved into the blockbuster franchise we know today. To understand the original plans for the Avengers, we need to go back to the early 2000s. At the time, Marvel Studios was still finding its footing. The company was in financial trouble, having sold off many of its biggest characters to other studios. Spider-Man was at Sony, the X-Men and Fantastic Four were under Fox, and the Hulk's solo film rights were with Universal. This meant that Marvel couldn't rely on its biggest names to build a shared universe. Instead, they had to dig into the depths of their catalog and find heroes that could work together in a way no one had ever seen before. Enter Kevin Feige, the man with the vision to turn Marvel's struggling situation into an opportunity. Feige and his team had a bold idea. What if they could create a cinematic universe where multiple heroes could coexist, just like in the comics? This concept was unheard of at the time. Studios weren't making interconnected franchises. Superhero movies were largely self-contained, with the occasional sequel but never a large-scale crossover. Marvel wanted to change that, and they had just the team to do it. The Avengers. Now here's where things get interesting. The original plans for the Avengers were very different from what we ultimately got. The first character Marvel Studios secured for their new cinematic universe was Iron Man, played by Robert Downey Jr. But what most people don't realize is that Iron Man was never intended to be the leader of the Avengers. That honor was supposed to go to Captain America, who at the time was viewed as the more traditional leader. However, Iron Man's overwhelming popularity changed everything. By the time the Avengers was being developed, Robert Downey Jr. had become the face of the MCU, and Iron Man was moved into a more central leadership role. Another major change was the inclusion of the Hulk. Originally, there were doubts about whether the character would be part of the Avengers at all. After the lukewarm reception of 2008's The Incredible Hulk, there were discussions about potentially sidelining the Green Giant. But the inclusion of Mark Ruffalo as Bruce Banner reinvigorated interest in the character, making the Hulk a key part of the Avengers lineup. But here's where things get even crazier. Early drafts of the Avengers considered bringing in characters that hadn't even been introduced in the MCU yet. One of the original plans included the Wasp as a founding member. Joss Whedon, the director of the Avengers, initially wanted to include Janet Van Dyne, aka the Wasp, as a major character. In fact, some early scripts had her playing a role similar to what Black Widow ultimately took on. However, with time constraints and the already packed lineup, the Wasp was scrapped, and Natasha Romanoff became the female lead of the team. There were also ideas to introduce Black Panther earlier in the MCU. While Black Panther didn't debut until 2018, Feige and his team originally discussed bringing T'Challa into the MCU much earlier, possibly as a supporting character in the Avengers or Captain America, the Winter Soldier. However, they ultimately decided to hold off until they could give him a proper introduction in Captain America: Civil War. And let's talk about one of the biggest what-ifs in Marvel history: Spider-Man. Before the Avengers was released, there were behind-the-scenes negotiations between Marvel and Sony about the possibility of including Spider-Man in the MCU. While the deal wouldn't happen until years later in Captain America: Civil War, early discussions suggested that Peter Parker could have been referenced or even had a small cameo in the Avengers. Imagine how different things would have been if Spider-Man had swung into the MCU years earlier. Another major shakeup involved Loki and the villain of the first Avengers movie. While Loki turned out to be a perfect antagonist for the team's first outing, early discussions considered other threats. One idea was to introduce Ultron much earlier, making him the first major villain the Avengers faced instead of Loki. However, Feige and his team decided to save Ultron for Avengers: Age of Ultron, and instead used Loki as the primary antagonist, setting up the invasion of the Chitauri army. Now let's shift gears and talk about casting. While it's hard to imagine anyone else playing these characters now, the original Avengers could have looked completely different. Did you know that Tom Cruise was once in talks to play Iron Man? That's right. Before Robert Downey Jr. was cast, Cruise was one of the top choices for Tony Stark. Meanwhile, Emily Blunt was originally cast as Black Widow but had to drop out due to scheduling conflicts, which led to Scarlett Johansson taking the role. Even Chris Hemsworth wasn't the first choice for Thor. The role was initially considered for other actors, including Alexander Skarsgård and Liam Hemsworth, Chris's own brother. And when it came to Captain America, actors like John Krasinski and Jensen Ackles were among those considered before Chris Evans landed the role. Ultimately, the Avengers movie we got was a massive success. But looking back at these original plans makes you wonder, how different would the MCU have been if these early ideas had come to life? Would the Wasp have been a fan favorite? Would Tom Cruise's Iron Man have worked? Would Ultron have been a better first villain than Loki? These are the fascinating what-ifs that make the history of the Avengers even more exciting. As we look ahead, Marvel Studios is gearing up for Avengers: Doomsday, a film set to redefine the superhero genre. The inclusion of Dr. Doom, played by Robert Downey Jr., is set to introduce a new kind of threat, one that is both intellectually and strategically superior to any villain the Avengers have faced before. This shift signals a more complex and multi-layered storytelling approach, one that could redefine how superhero movies are made. And let's not forget about Avengers: Secret Wars, slated for 2027. This film is expected to bring together heroes from different multiverses, allowing for some truly mind-blowing interactions. Could we see Hugh Jackman's Wolverine fight alongside Tom Holland's Spider-Man? Could Iron Man return in some form? The possibilities are endless, and Marvel fans worldwide are eagerly waiting to see how it all unfolds. So, what do you think? Would you have wanted to see the Wasp in the first Avengers movie? Could Tom Cruise have pulled off Iron Man? And what are your theories for the next Avengers films? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on more deep dives into your favorite movies and superheroes. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.